These are 5 disturbing cases of intruders secretly living in people's homes. Number 1. Velma Kellen. In 2013, Velma Kellen got a shock when she hired a repairman to take a look at her furnace. As the winter chill set in, Velma noticed her house never felt warm. However, even after getting a new furnace, the problem continued. Not only that, but Velma noticed strange occurrences in her home. There was a mysterious smell that Velma would describe as worse than cigarettes that lingered in random rooms of her house. She then noticed the latch on her back gate kept opening on its own. Eventually, Velma would call a repairman, and what he found was truly disturbing. Someone had been living under Velma's house. The stranger had tampered with the home's heating ducts, redirecting the warm air to the crawl space under the house. Whoever was staying under the home must have been having a good time, because the repairman also found bottles of beer and liquor, as well as marijuana, scattered under the home. While the repairman was able to fix the heating ducts, the mystery of who was living under Velma's home was never solved. Number 2. Tatsuko Horikawa. In 2008, a man living in the sleepy town of Kasuya, Japan, installed security cameras in his home. For months, the man noticed food would go missing in his refrigerator, but there was never any sign of a break-in. Despite no sign of entry, the man was convinced someone was sneaking inside of his home. So, he took matters into his own hands and installed security cameras to catch the culprit in the act. What the man discovered was beyond his wildest imagination. While at work, the homeowner got an alert on his phone from the security camera. The footage revealed a woman moving about his home, eating his food, and even taking naps on his couch and watching TV. But how did she get in? Believing the woman was a burglar, he alerted the authorities, but when cops arrived, no one was in the home. The police went room to room until finally reaching the bedroom. Looking inside the closet, they found the woman. She was older and lying on the top shelf as she tried to hide. After getting her out of the closet, police were astonished by what the woman told them. She had actually been living in the man's house for over a year, hiding when he was home and only coming out to get food and shower when he was away. Inside the closet, the woman had brought up a futon and had several plastic drinking bottles. The woman, identified as 58-year-old Tatsuko Horikawa, was arrested for trespassing and for stealing the man's food. No one knows how she was able to go undetected for so long. While this man didn't know about his unwelcome house guests, this college student wasn't so lucky. Number 3. Andrew Swofford. In 2019, Maddie was a student at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. After moving into her dorm, Maddie noticed things in her room would be moved around or go missing when she came back from class. At first, she and her roommate thought their dorm might have been haunted. However, it would be on a Saturday that her fears would turn from spooky to downright terrifying. Quote, "I hear rattling in my closet. It sounds like a raccoon in my closet." End quote. Then Maddie would call out, and unfortunately, she got an answer. Quote, "I'm like, who's there?" And somebody answered me. He's like, "Oh, I'm Drew." End quote. Maddie then opened the closet and saw a man sitting there wearing her clothes. Quote, "He's in there wearing all of my clothes, my socks, my shoes, and he's got a book bag full of my clothes." End quote. The man Maddie found in her closet was 30-year-old Andrew Swofford. While Maddie texted her boyfriend to come over, she did her best to keep Andrew distracted. Quote, "He tried on my hat. He goes in the bathroom and looks in the mirror, and then is like, 'You're very pretty. Can I give you a hug?' End quote. But Maddie insisted the man never touched her. Swofford left Maddie's dorm after her boyfriend arrived, and was later arrested where he was charged with misdemeanor breaking and entering. Number 4. Carlo Castellanos-feria. In November of 2005, Carlos Castellanos-feria was working as a valet attendant for Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring, Maryland. While working as an attendant, Carlo became infatuated with Michelle Frendenberg-Onion, the director of physical therapy at the hospital. In a twisted attempt to get closer to Michelle, Carlo made copies of her keys and snuck into her apartment while she was away. Once inside, Carlo set up a video camera on Michelle's desk before hiding under her bed, where shockingly, he was able to remain for 2 whole days. He packed a change of clothes, latex gloves, and a power cord. clearly planning to be there for an extended period of time. Michelle and her husband had no idea someone was hidden under their bed. The couple went about their daily lives, completely unaware that they were being filmed. It wasn't until the morning of the third day that Michelle's husband discovered Carlo hiding under the bed. Castellanos-feria was arrested. In March of the following year, Michelle told the courts, quote, "It was a horrible experience and has altered my life hugely. I do not want this to happen to anyone else. It's horrible." End quote. Carlo was sentenced to 38 months in prison for his crimes and also was required to undergo evaluation. This final case is the most disturbing of them all, starting with what seemed to be an unsolvable murder. Number 5. The Denver Spider-Man. On October 17th, 1941, 73-year-old Philip Peters was found dead on the floor of his downstairs bathroom. Neighbors who found him had become concerned when he didn't come over to get the meals they had prepared for him. Philip's wife had gone to the hospital earlier that month due to her injured hip, and Philip's neighbors had agreed to check in on him and make him food while his wife was recovering. After struggling to find a way into Peter's house, Philip's neighbor was greeted by a gruesome scene in the downstairs bedroom. The cops would determine that Peters had been bludgeoned to death, with more than a dozen wounds in the skull. The motive was a mystery, given that Peter's watch and wallet remained untouched on the dresser. It hadn't been a robbery. The door and window were locked. Not only was the door locked by key, but the security chain was securely fastened, something that could have only been done from inside the house. The killer had to still be there. However, despite searching the house, the cops couldn't find whoever had done this. It was as if the killer had disappeared into thin air. For the next 3 months, the house remained empty, as Mrs. Peters continued her stay at the hospital recovering, and undoubtedly grieving the loss of her husband. At that time, neighborhood kids claimed they could see lights coming from inside the empty house. Another neighbor reported seeing a ghostly face staring out at her from a window. Soon, gossip started to circulate that the house, as one neighbor put it, was full of haunts. Despite the rumors, Mrs. Peters returned to the house that had been her home for over 50 years once she was able to leave the hospital. One night, something startled her, making her fall and re-injuring her hip. Not wanting to return to the hospital, she hired a nurse to move in for full-time care. However, once the nurse moved in, she reported hearing strange sounds in the wall, describing them as rattling noises. An investigation came up with nothing, and then a few days later, the nurse reported sighting a spook hiding on the back staircase, its teeth chattering. It was all too much for the nurse, who quickly left the house. A caring neighbor would move in to help Mrs. Peters, but she too had bad experiences in the house. Just like the nurse, she heard strange noises. And then one day, she saw the ghost the nurse had seen, that she described as a filthy wraith-like thing that vanished when she screamed. After finally convincing Mrs. Peters to move out of her home and in with her son, the police put the house under constant surveillance. Fast forward to 10 months after Philip Peters' body was discovered, and police would finally catch a break. Stationed across the street on lookout, one of the officers caught a glimpse of a face in one of the windows of the empty house. He and his partner stormed the home, whistling for backup as the face disappeared from the window. Busting into the home, the officers swept the downstairs as more police joined them. Going upstairs, one of the officers saw the door to a closet close just as they came around the corner. Scrambling to get to the door, the officer swung it open to see 2 feet dangling from the wall. The officer lunged, grabbing the ankles, and after 5 minutes, had the man lying on the floor, passed out from the struggle. The man they had just captured was Theodore Edward Coney. Theodore was practically starved to death when the police captured him. He had secretly been living in the crawl space in the home for over 10 months. The crawl space he was living in was described as barely bigger than a coffin. Eyewitness accounts said the place smelled terrible, and that it was full of the man's waste. For a bed, the man used an old ironing board and newspapers. And as one person commented, it was like a spider's den. When newspapers got wind of this description, Theodore Edward Coney would be nicknamed the Denver Spider-Man. When Coney was awake and well enough to speak, he told a terrifying tale. Back in September, Coney came to call on Mr. Peters. When he found no one home but the door unlocked, Theodore let himself in and helped himself to the Peters icebox. He then went upstairs and found a small crawl space. There, he would start his secret residency in the Peters home. For the first month, it had been just him and Philip Peters. At first, Theodore would hide when he heard the old man, but soon he became more bold and started to actually shadow the old man from room to room, making a game of it. Coney said it gave him a thrill because it was the first time in his life he had ever had someone at his mercy, but he insisted he never planned to hurt the 73-year-old. But then one night, Theodore made a mistake. He came out of hiding to raid the icebox when he thought Philip was gone. However, the 73-year-old had only gone into his room to take a nap. Philip found Theodore in his kitchen, and a fight broke out. Theodore beat Peters with a stove shaker before going back to his hiding spot and waiting for the body to be found. Theodore would be tried and found guilty, getting a life sentence. In prison, he would become the prison librarian, before dying in the prison hospital in May of 1967.